I'm Alivia Isch, and I am a secondary English education major, which most of you know what that means, but for those of you who don't, I will be teaching middle school or high school English in the next year and a half or so. So that's really exciting, and my project is focused on that as my major. As you can see, the title of my project is Students Writing for an Audience Beyond the Teacher, and I'll get into what that means in just a little bit. So just kind of an overview of what I'm going to be talking through with you guys. I'm the Weitzman Scholar, and that means that there are a few differences from my project to all of the other projects that you've heard today. The main difference is that my project has a huge research component to it. All of the other projects require research, but what you're hearing today is mostly the research that we've done. And then towards the end, I'll talk a little bit about I'll be doing action research next fall in a classroom. And that will be kind of my community-based part of this, because helping in a classroom is helping the community and the future. Then I will talk about what my research questions were for this project, the timeline that I've gone through, our process, findings, and then the future research plans. So to start off, as I said, being Weitzman, things are a little different. With this research component, my original plan for college was to graduate a year early, but you know, life happens, different things are thrown your way, and I'm here all 4 years. But that meant that I got a whole extra year of research, which has been awesome because I have expanded this project with Luke so much more than what we had originally anticipated with just that 2 years, and now we have 3. So yeah, it's been a great experience, and even though it's been a little bit different, I wouldn't change a thing about it. So the questions that have led this research, number one is what we're really focusing on, and that's what opportunities have secondary level teachers provided for their students to write for an authentic audience, or an audience beyond the teacher. And we've mainly focused just in English Journal, which is the primary journal for secondary level English teachers, and we did from 1993 through 2017. So we covered 25 years of research, which I'll get to how much that is in a little bit, but it was a lot of research, and we looked through all of those because we wanted to include the spectrum of the web in the classroom. The second question then is, you know, with these opportunities, what audiences we're focused on, and then we also wanted to look at the rationales and challenges that were stated. So just to start the timeline, I started August of 2016 working on this, and from then until December of 2017, we reviewed articles. This was, and it says in another slide, but this was 1,760 articles total that the two of us looked through, and when I say that number, it's still kind of crazy to me that we got through all of that, but yeah, it took a long time, and that was why. But we spent most of that time looking through those articles and coding those articles, which I'll get to in a little bit. In November of 2016, I attended NCTE, which is the National Council of Teachers of English, their annual convention in Atlanta, Georgia, and was able to present there the findings that I had so far, which was just a few months in this broader spectrum of about 20 months is what we're at right now. And then this spring, we began writing for publication. We hope to get the research that we've done so far published in English Journal. So we're currently working on that manuscript, and the plan is to send it in this summer. Last week, so March 15th, I met with my potential teacher that I'm going to be working with next fall for the action research, which I'll get to later in the presentation. Yesterday, I presented at the Undergraduate Research Symposium. I had a poster with all of my research on it. Today, I'm presenting to you. We hope to present our application to the IRB in April or May, depending on what we hear back from Homestead, which is where I'll be doing my action research. And then our manuscript, as I mentioned briefly earlier, will be sent in this summer. Next fall, I will begin the action research in the classroom, hopefully be able to present again at NCTE in November at their annual convention, and then gather the findings from the action research, present maybe again at next year's symposium because it was such a great experience this year, and then I'll be back here next March or April to present to you all of my findings. So the process of what we did was we looked at 1,760 articles in English Journal. And as I mentioned before, we just wanted to cover that spectrum of the web. Then we looked at, as we were looking through each of these articles, does it meet these certain criteria that we have set in place? Are they peer-reviewed? And we said that because even though it's a journal, and you would think that most of them are peer-reviewed, sometimes there would be columns or student-submitted poetry or editor-reviewed pieces. And so we wanted, just for the quality of that, to look at the peer-reviewed articles. We then narrowed it down to writing-based articles because English is so broad. And if for any of you who have taken English electives in college, there are so many that are offered. We just wanted to focus on writing-based, and then from there narrowed it down even more to, is it writing for an authentic audience? Lastly, we looked at, is it for a secondary audience, because that's what our focus is, and because sometimes in English Journal there would be a few for elementary or for college level just thrown in here and there. And then lastly, is it a final product? So in other words, the students are not in the writing process, so they're not just peer reviewing on their pieces that they're writing in school. So this is just an example. Everything that we've done has been on Google Docs so that we can easily communicate back and forth and review each other's work, which has been a great way for us to work together. And so this is the writing-focused chart. In the green and bolded, that's the audience, the authentic audience, the ones that we're really focusing on. So this is just writing-focused. The yellow ones are ones that kind of related to our project, but didn't necessarily implement it as a project classroom. What we ended up including extra in the ones that we wanted to look at were the audience, the text type, the delivery method, teacher intent, challenges, and rationale. Text type, just to kind of explain what these mean, text type would be, so you have poetry, you have research papers, you have letters, just all of these different types of writing that you would have in the classroom. Delivery would be whether they presented it or mailed in a letter. And teacher intent would kind of just talk about the rhetorical is what we wanted to focus on, and that's, does the project that the students are working on, does their writing, is that driven by the purpose in the audience? So they're not just writing to the teacher. And we really wanted to look at rhetorical, and I'll explain in just a little bit. We then separated it into two tables. The audience-related table, and this is just an example of what it currently looks like, split up by the different audiences. And then the text type table. And this just helped us to kind of look at it and be able to sort things out on our own. So here are a few graphs that represent our findings, and I'll go through each of them separately. So what we found were we found more than 5 key points, but these are the 5 that I want to focus on today. First, the number of issues fluctuated a lot per year. So you can see in 2006, there's this huge peak. And our first thought as we looked at this was maybe that's because of technology being implemented in the classroom. But what we found was this was more just related to the themes of the issues that were presented. So in other words, if it was a literature or reading-based theme, it was going to look a lot more like 2002, where there's just a couple that related to what we were looking at. The next thing that we looked at, the second bullet point, was that the majority of the audiences were still in the school community. So if we look at this pie chart, these 2 purple sections are the school community and students in the classroom. That's 48% of what we found. We had 119 articles, so almost half of those were all still based in the school. And we kind of wondered, why is this? We thought that if it's an authentic audience, why not make it authentic? But when we talked to the teacher that I'm going to be working with in the fall, she mentioned that this is probably because students really see that as an authentic audience. That's who they can relate to. They know how their peers are going to react to their work. They don't know how someone miles and miles away reading their blog post is going to react to their work. The third thing was that the majority of the writing that we found was nonfiction. So more than 50% of this. Here this breaks it down by text type. Articles, essays, letters, memoirs, other nonfiction, and research are all completely nonfiction. There are a few other nonfiction scattered in the poetry, or this varied by choice section. A lot of those were nonfiction. So that's why we have to say more than 50% because we don't have the exact number. And we think that that is probably because of the approach, which is what I'm going to get to next. The majority was rhetorical approach. So approximately 51% of teachers took a rhetorical approach when talking about their intent to have students write for this broader audience. This, as I mentioned earlier, means that they were driven by that purpose and audience in their writing. So we were excited that it was more than 50%, but that also meant that 49% was not rhetorical approach. So some of the examples that we ended up finding were, for poetry, teachers might have their students write the poem and then read it to the class. So it wasn't necessarily written for the class, but it was written to present to the class. So there's a difference in that. And then the last thing that we noticed was the lack of challenges and rationale that were listed in the findings. So the teachers who ended up talking about what they did in their classroom didn't always talk about why they did it. And they also didn't talk about any challenges they faced, which as a future teacher, if I'm reading someone's work, one, I want to know why I should do what they're doing. And two, I also want to know, hey, did you have any challenges here? Because if I have challenges, I don't want to blame myself. I don't want to wonder what I did wrong or what, is this my class that can't do this? I don't want to have those thoughts. So if other teachers talk about challenges that they faced, then having those will help future teachers who want to implement this in their classrooms. So the future plan, as I mentioned previously, we are working on a manuscript currently to have published in English Journal. And then next fall, I will begin the action research part of this project. So what the plan is right now is I met with Lisa Baltes, who is a teacher at Homestead High School. And what we're going to be doing is I'll either be working with her or another teacher who teaches a composition class. And what they do is their first writing assignment of the year is to write letters of concern or letters of intent to local leaders. This could be someone in their school system, so the principal or superintendent, but this could also be chancellors or CEOs or the mayor. This is a very wide and broad audience for the students to try to reach, but I think that for me, to be able to interview these students then when they're done and say, hey, why did you pick this audience? How do you think that relates to your project that you're working on? And hear what they have to say, how their experience was through all of that, will be able to help me in my future classroom. And not only will this project help me as a teacher, but also if we can publish these findings, it can help inspire other teachers to implement this in their own classrooms. So with that, thank you so much for listening through this long day. Are there any questions?
Yeah, it's just like talking about how how many articles you guys had to read. Like that's kind of that's insane. But like, what was the like if you give me like a ballpark, like what was the average length of these articles that you guys were like reading?
Well, so it really depended on the issue. I think they had Luke's here, so I'm kind of looking at him. Wasn't it around 5 or 6 pages?
I would say so, yeah. The word count right now in an article is 3,750 is the maximum for that journal.
So it's not like there were, 12-page articles in there, because they do have a word count. Yeah. Right, but still, yeah. It was a lot to look through, you're right. Mary?
I was just curious, what kinds of things are you looking for when you would look at the letters that they're writing to different leaders and things like that? What kind of things would indicate to you that they are achieving that goal of reaching the audience beyond the teacher?
So one thing that I haven't really thought of until just now that you mentioned that is that because this is their first piece of writing, my original plan was to compare writings throughout the year and see how that changed, but this is their first piece of writing for the year. So not knowing those students prior, I won't really have anything to compare it to, but being able to interview them after the whole process, and that's why I have to go and talk or go and submit an application to the IRB, is because I will be interviewing these students. But working with them and kind of hearing how their experience changed as they were writing will definitely be huge, because, you know, if you think back to middle school and high school, the papers that you wrote for a grade and to the teacher were a lot different than the papers that you would write, you know, specifically to a broader audience or more authentic audience. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. Does that answer your question? Okay. Thank you.